When I first met Samuel, he was sitting quietly in the corner of my clinic's waiting room, hands wrapped gently around a stainless steel water bottle he seemed to be clutching for comfort. Samuel is 58 years old, a retired high school history teacher with a fondness for morning walks, gardening, and his wife's homemade apple pie. He had always been the picture of good health, rarely missing a day of work in his teaching years, hardly ever visiting the doctor except for his annual checkups. But on that day, there was a tension in his posture and a certain weariness in his eyes that told me something had been troubling him for a while. It started, he said, as a faint burn in his chest after dinner. Nothing alarming at first. Just a bit of heartburn, he had told his wife, brushing it off as indigestion from eating too quickly or perhaps from that extra slice of pizza. But over time, the burning sensation began to creep higher, lingering longer. It came not only after rich meals, but even after something as innocent as a slice of toast or a cup of coffee. Then came the sleepless nights. He would lie in bed, feeling as though acid was creeping into his throat, forcing him to prop himself up on pillows just to breathe without discomfort. Samuel tried the usual quick fixes, over-the-counter antacids, avoiding spicy food, even skipping his beloved morning coffee. But the relief was always temporary. Soon, even a simple walk in the park would trigger an uncomfortable pressure in his chest, accompanied by a sour taste in his mouth. The turning point came one chilly autumn evening when he and his wife were at their daughter's house for dinner. After a warm meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, Samuel felt a sharp, almost stabbing pain behind his breastbone. It was so intense that his daughter insisted on calling an ambulance, fearing it might be a heart attack. Thankfully, the tests in the emergency room ruled out anything life-threatening to his heart. But the doctor explained that Samuel's symptoms were consistent with chronic acid reflux, also known as gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD. The diagnosis came with both relief and frustration. Relief that it wasn't his heart, but frustration because he realized this wasn't just a passing nuisance. Left unchecked, it could erode his esophagus, disrupt his sleep, and drain the joy from everyday moments. That night, Samuel lay awake thinking about how something as small as stomach acid could upend his sense of well-being. In the days that followed, Samuel found himself at a crossroads. He could either resign himself to a lifetime of medication with its own risks and side effects, or he could search for gentler, more natural ways to help his body heal. That's when he came to see me, not just as a patient seeking treatment, but as someone looking for a way to reclaim his quality of life. Sitting across from me in my office, Samuel spoke with a quiet determination. "I don't just want to suppress the symptoms," he said. "I want to help my stomach work the way it's supposed to." I nodded because I knew exactly what he meant. After decades of working with people facing stomach and digestion issues, I've seen how much more powerful it is to support the body's natural balance rather than fight it with harsh chemicals. We talked about stress management, eating habits, and the role of certain foods. But when I mentioned the power of herbal teas, Samuel's expression softened with curiosity. He had never thought of tea as anything more than a warm drink on a cold day. "Could something that simple really make a difference?" he asked. The truth is, it can. Over centuries, people across cultures have relied on specific herbal infusions to calm the stomach, soothe inflammation, and restore digestive balance. These are not just old wives' tales. Modern science has begun to confirm what traditional wisdom has long known. And for someone like Samuel, who is eager to avoid dependency on medication, these teas offered a safe, gentle, and enjoyable starting point. I explained to him that each tea works a little differently. Some relax the muscles in the digestive tract, some reduce acid production, others help the stomach empty more efficiently. Together, they could form a daily ritual that would not only ease his reflux, but also bring comfort and warmth to his life. Samuel agreed to give it a try, but I asked him for one important promise: to approach this as more than just drinking tea for a few days. Healing, especially when it comes to the digestive system, takes patience. It's about creating small moments in the day where the body feels safe enough to let go of tension and restore itself. That meant preparing the tea mindfully, sipping it slowly, and listening to how his body responded. It wasn't just about the tea, it was about teaching his body that it didn't need to be in constant defense mode. I still remember the call I got from him 2 weeks later. "It's not gone completely," he admitted, "but the nights are easier. I'm sleeping better. I even had my coffee yesterday morning, and it didn't set me on fire like before." His voice had a note of surprise in it, as if he couldn't quite believe that something so gentle could have such a noticeable effect. That was the beginning of his journey, not just toward calmer digestion, but toward a healthier relationship with his own body. In the months that followed, Samuel learned to trust that change was possible. He discovered new flavors he loved, found comfort in simple rituals, and realized that health isn't about perfection, it's about direction. The teas became part of his story, not as a quick fix, but as daily companions guiding him toward balance. And as we sit here today, ready to talk about each of these teas in detail, I think of Samuel not as just my patient, but as a reminder that the gentlest solutions are often the most profound. So if you've been living with that same burn in your chest, that same knot in your stomach after meals, I invite you to join me as I walk you through the teas that help Samuel. You might just find, as he did, that a warm cup in your hands can lead to a lighter, calmer, and more comfortable life. Samuel's troubles didn't arrive like a sudden storm. They crept in slowly, like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave. At first, it was just a faint tingle in his chest after the occasional indulgent meal. He would shrug it off, joking with his wife that it was the price of enjoying life. But then, little by little, it stopped being funny. Even the simplest meals, a piece of toast, a small bowl of oatmeal, started to stir that familiar burn in his chest. He found himself eyeing the dinner table like it was an opponent in a boxing ring, bracing for the next round. His wife Anna noticed the change before he did. She saw the way he would hesitate before taking a bite, the way he avoided certain dishes he once loved. Sunday dinners at their daughter's house became awkward. Samuel would quietly push food around his plate, pretending to eat while secretly trying to avoid another night of pain. "You've got to see someone about this," Anna urged one evening. But Samuel, stubborn as always, assured her it was just a phase. He was a man who had powered through colds, backaches, and sleepless nights without complaint. But this was different. This wasn't something he could simply grit his teeth and ignore. One evening in early autumn, the battle escalated. After a simple dinner of baked chicken and vegetables, Samuel felt as if his chest was on fire. He stood up from the table, gripping the edge for support, trying to breathe through the pain. The burning climbed up his throat, leaving a bitter taste that made him wince. Anna rushed to his side, her voice laced with worry. "That's it," she said firmly. "We're going to the hospital." For the first time, Samuel didn't argue. At the emergency room, the hours felt like days. Nurses checked his vitals, doctors ran tests, and Samuel sat there quietly, trying to make sense of how such a simple thing as eating could bring him here. When the results came back, relief mixed with uncertainty. It wasn't a heart attack, but the diagnosis of chronic acid reflux made him realize this was no minor inconvenience. It was a battle he had been losing without even knowing it. That night, as they drove home, Samuel looked out the car window at the passing streetlights. He felt smaller somehow, as though the world had closed in around him. He thought of the meals he had enjoyed all his life, family barbecues, holiday feasts, quiet breakfasts with Anna, and wondered if those days were over. He didn't say much, but Anna reached over and took his hand. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. It was the first time he realized this wasn't just his fight, it was theirs. The following days brought new habits born out of necessity. Samuel began to eat more slowly, smaller portions, avoiding anything he suspected might trigger the burn. But despite his efforts, the fire still returned. Some nights were better than others, but he never felt truly at ease. Every meal felt like rolling the dice. It wasn't just about food anymore, it was about trust. Trust in his own body. Trust that he could get through a day without fear of the burn returning. That's when he decided he needed help. Not just from medication, not just from avoiding spicy food, but from someone who could help him understand what was really happening inside his body. That decision, small as it may seem, was the first real turning point in his journey. It wasn't about surrendering to the problem. It was about choosing to face it head on, to learn how to make peace with his body rather than fight it at every meal. When Samuel first heard the words acid reflux, he thought it was just another way of saying heartburn. He imagined it was simply about eating the wrong food or eating too much. But as he sat in my office a week later, listening to me explain the mechanics of reflux, he began to realize it was far more complex. I could see the mix of frustration and curiosity in his eyes. "So you're saying it's not just the chili peppers and tomato sauce?" he asked. I smiled gently. No, Samuel. The truth is, there are many hidden triggers. Some of them are obvious, and some are hiding in plain sight. We started with the basics. Certain foods were well-known culprits, fried foods, chocolate, coffee, but others were sneakier. Even things Samuel thought were harmless could be stirring trouble. The big surprise came when I mentioned peppermint. But peppermint is soothing, Samuel said, his brow furrowed. I've had peppermint tea for years. I explained that while peppermint can relax the digestive tract, it can also relax the lower esophageal sphincter, the small valve that keeps stomach acid where it belongs. In some people, that relaxation invites acid to travel upward. Samuel sat back in his chair, absorbing this new reality. Then we talked about habits. It wasn't just what he ate, but when and how. Late-night dinners, lying down too soon after eating, even bending over to tie his shoes after a meal could push acid in the wrong direction. Samuel thought back to his evenings at home. He often had dinner at 8, then watched television from his recliner until bedtime. Sometimes he'd fall asleep in the chair, waking in the early hours with that familiar burn. I thought I was just getting old, he murmured. I didn't realize I was helping it happen. But perhaps the most surprising trigger of all was stress. Samuel had always prided himself on being calm under pressure, the sort of teacher who could handle a classroom full of restless teenagers without raising his voice. But retirement had brought its own set of worries: finances, health, feeling useful in a quieter world. I explained that stress could change the way the digestive system functioned, slowing down emptying and increasing acid production. It's like your body stays on high alert, I told him, and your stomach gets caught in the crossfire. That evening, Samuel went home and began to observe himself in a way he never had before. He noticed how quickly he ate when he was hungry, barely chewing before swallowing. He noticed how he always seemed to eat more than he needed when the food was especially good, like Anna's roast chicken. He noticed that the burn sometimes appeared even after bland meals, a clue that it wasn't just about spicy foods. He realized that the puzzle was bigger and more personal than he had imagined. Anna joined him in the detective work. She started keeping a small notebook in the kitchen, jotting down what Samuel ate, when he ate it, and how he felt afterward. They began to see patterns. Ice cream after dinner almost always led to trouble. Eating too close to bedtime was a sure recipe for a restless night. And oddly enough, rushing through lunch after a busy morning of errands often brought on symptoms, even if the meal itself was plain. It's like my stomach is keeping score, Samuel joked one afternoon. But the humor was a sign of hope. He was starting to feel more in control simply by paying attention. The real breakthrough came one Sunday afternoon. Samuel had spent the morning in the garden, tending to his tomatoes and cucumbers. By lunchtime, he was tired and hungry, so he made himself a quick sandwich and ate it while standing at the kitchen counter. 15 minutes later, the burn arrived. He sat down with a sigh, realizing that even this simple act, eating while rushed on his feet, was a trigger. That was the day he truly understood. Reflux wasn't just about avoiding certain foods, it was about respecting the way his body wanted to be treated. From that day on, Samuel approached his meals differently. He began to eat sitting down without distractions, giving himself time to chew thoroughly and enjoy each bite. He tried to keep dinner earlier, giving his body a few hours to digest before bedtime. And most importantly, he began to think about food as part of a larger picture, one that included how he moved, how he rested, and how he managed the small stresses of daily life. When he returned to my office 2 weeks later, there was a lightness in his voice. It's still there sometimes, he admitted, but I feel like I'm learning the rules of the game, and when I follow them, I win more often. I nodded because this was exactly the shift I had hoped to see, not just fewer symptoms, but a sense of partnership between Samuel and his own body. It was the beginning of him reclaiming meals as moments of nourishment and connection instead of battles to be endured. The first time Samuel truly considered that something as simple as a cup of tea might help him was on a cool October morning. The rain had been falling since before dawn, drumming gently against the kitchen window. Samuel shuffled into the kitchen in his slippers, the remnants of last night's burn still lingering in his chest. Anna was already there, wrapping her hands around a steaming mug. "Chamomile," she said, smiling softly, "helps me feel calm on mornings like this." Samuel took the mug she offered him and inhaled the delicate, apple-like scent. He wasn't expecting much. Tea had always been something he drank out of politeness, not conviction. But as the warmth spread through his hands, then down his throat, something inside him softened. It wasn't a cure, but it was comfort. The sensation was gentle, like a blanket draped over his stomach. For the first time in weeks, he felt his body unclench just a little. That day, instead of rushing to his usual coffee, he decided to linger with the tea. He sat at the table, watching the rain blur the world outside, and took slow, measured sips. Each swallow seemed to quiet the restless churn in his stomach. It wasn't magic. The reflux didn't disappear entirely, but there was a shift. He noticed it most in the way he carried himself afterward. His shoulders loosened, his breathing deeper. Anna, watching from across the table, tilted her head. "You look peaceful," she said. "I remember Samuel telling me about that morning at his next appointment." "It wasn't just the tea," he insisted. "It was the whole ritual, sitting down, taking my time, feeling warm from the inside out." I smiled because he had stumbled onto something I often tell my patients. Sometimes the act of slowing down and caring for yourself is as important as the remedy itself. A warm cup forces you to pause, to be present. And for a stomach under siege, that pause can be the first step toward healing. Encouraged by that small discovery, Samuel began experimenting. He tried ginger tea one chilly afternoon after lunch, letting the spicy scent clear his head as the heat settled in his belly. There was a faint, tingling warmth, different from chamomile's floral calmness, but equally comforting in its own way. "It's like my stomach is waking up," he told me later. On another evening, when bloating left him feeling heavy and sluggish, he brewed fennel tea, the sweet, licorice-like aroma filling the kitchen. By the time he finished the cup, the pressure in his midsection had eased. The more he explored, the more Samuel realized these teas weren't just drinks. They were tiny acts of care he could give himself throughout the day. Each one seemed to have its own personality, its own way of soothing him, and each cup was a gentle reminder that he wasn't powerless against his symptoms. He could make choices, even small ones, that would nudge his body toward comfort rather than conflict. It wasn't only the physical relief that mattered, the emotional weight of reflux, the constant second-guessing of meals, the quiet dread before bedtime, had been wearing Samuel down. But with these teas, he began to reclaim a sense of safety. The ritual gave him something to look forward to. The kitchen became less a place of worry and more a space of possibility. And Anna, always ready to join him, found joy in preparing the teas together, turning them into moments of connection. One Saturday afternoon, their daughter Emily stopped by. She found her parents sitting at the table, each with a steaming mug, sunlight streaming through the rain-slick window. "What's this?" she asked, pulling up a chair. Anna poured her a cup of cinnamon tea, explaining how it helped Samuel's digestion. Emily took a sip and grinned. "Well, this is much nicer than watching Dad swallow chalky antacids." They all laughed, but beneath the humor was a quiet truth. Samuel was finding a better way forward. Of course, not every day was perfect. There were still evenings when a poorly timed meal or a rich dessert would stir up the familiar burn. But even then, Samuel had a plan. Instead of lying in bed, grimacing in frustration, he would brew a tea that matched his need. Sometimes it was chamomile for calm, other times ginger for warmth, fennel for bloating, or peppermint for a light, cooling touch. Though he learned quickly to use peppermint cautiously, remembering my warning about its effect on reflux. This new relationship with tea didn't replace other healthy changes. He still ate earlier, chewed more slowly, and avoided late-night snacks. But the teas became a thread woven through his days, binding together the lessons he was learning. They weren't a miracle cure, and Samuel knew it, but they were a daily reminder that healing often begins with gentleness. As the weeks passed, the storm inside Samuel's stomach began to quiet. He noticed fewer flare-ups, better sleep, and more mornings like that rainy October day. But perhaps the greatest change was in the way he viewed his own body. No longer an enemy to be subdued, it was a partner to be cared for. And with every warm cup, Samuel was learning that peace, both in the stomach and in the mind, could be nurtured, one sip at a time. The first time Samuel truly felt the impact of a single tea on his digestion happened on a cold November afternoon. The air outside was sharp with the bite of early winter, and Samuel had just returned from running errands in town. He'd skipped breakfast that morning, thinking he would treat himself to a hearty lunch once the shopping was done. By the time he got home, he was ravenous, and he made the mistake of eating too quickly. It wasn't anything fancy, just a thick turkey sandwich with a side of potato soup. But before he had even finished the last bite, he could feel the familiar warmth rising behind his breastbone. "Here we go again," he muttered, setting the empty bowl in the sink. The burn deepened as he tidied up, that unpleasant sensation wrapping itself around his chest like a tight band. Anna, always watching for ways to help, walked into the kitchen and placed a small packet in front of him. "Ginger tea," she said simply. "I read that it can help your stomach settle." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Isn't ginger just for colds?" Anna smiled knowingly. "Try it. You might be surprised." He did. The moment the water hit the thin slices of ginger, a warm, spicy aroma curled into the air. Samuel cupped the mug in both hands, inhaling deeply before taking his first cautious sip. The heat spread down his throat and into his chest, then bloomed warmly in his stomach. There was a faint tingling, almost like the ginger was waking something up inside him. It was sharper than chamomile, more assertive, as if it had work to do. Within 15 minutes, the heaviness in his stomach began to ease. The tightness in his chest loosened, replaced by a spreading warmth that seemed to push the discomfort further and further away. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, savoring the sensation. "It's like my stomach just exhaled," he told me later, searching for the right words. When Samuel came in for his next appointment, ginger was the first thing he mentioned. "I think it really works," he said with a mix of wonder and relief. It didn't erase everything instantly, but it made it so much easier to handle. And it's not just the warmth, it's like it smooths things out inside. I explained that ginger has long been valued for its anti-inflammatory and digestive benefits. In traditional medicine, it's been used to calm nausea, ease bloating, and improve circulation. Modern research supports much of this wisdom, showing that compounds in ginger can help relax the muscles in the digestive tract, making it easier for food to move along without causing a backflow of acid. Samuel nodded, clearly pleased that there was science behind what he had felt. From that day forward, ginger tea became his go-to for those moments when he felt reflux creeping in. But he also began to use it preventively. On days when he knew he'd be eating a heavier lunch or attending a family gathering, he would brew a mug beforehand, letting the warmth prepare his stomach for what was coming. He described it like giving his digestive system a gentle heads up before it had to go to work. One Saturday evening, Samuel put this strategy to the test at Emily's birthday dinner. The table was laden with all his favorites: roast beef, buttery mashed potatoes, and Anna's famous chocolate cake. In the past, this would have been a minefield. But before they left the house, Samuel made himself a strong cup of ginger tea, sipping it slowly while chatting with Anna. At the party, he enjoyed the food without overindulging, and later that night, he was surprised to find that he could lie down without the usual wave of burning discomfort. Anna noticed too. "You're not tossing and turning," she said the next morning. Samuel grinned. "It's the ginger, my secret weapon." There was a quiet pride in his voice, not just for avoiding a bad night, but for finding something that worked for him. Of course, he learned to use ginger with care. Too much, too strong, and the sharpness could feel overwhelming. But with the right balance, it became a reliable ally in his quest for calmer digestion. And unlike medication, it carried no side effects for him, no uneasy sense of dependency. Just a simple, warming drink that worked in harmony with his body. As winter deepened, the ritual of making ginger tea became part of the season's rhythm. Samuel would peel fresh ginger roots in the morning, slice them into thin coins, and store them in a small jar in the fridge. In the afternoon, he'd drop a few slices into a teapot, pour over boiling water, and wait for the golden infusion to develop. The scent filled the kitchen, mingling with the faint wood smoke from the fireplace. Anna would often join him, even if she wasn't having reflux, simply because the tea was so comforting on cold days. More than once, Samuel reflected on how something so small could make such a difference. A month earlier, he'd been waking in the middle of the night, swallowing back acid, and wondering if his days of eating without fear were behind him. Now, he had tools, not cures, but tools, that allowed him to live more fully again. And ginger, with its assertive warmth and calming effect, was quickly becoming one of his favorites. The real turning point came in late December. Samuel and Anna were visiting friends for a holiday lunch. The spread was indulgent: rich stews, fresh bread, spiced desserts. Normally, Samuel would have approached the table with caution, but this time he felt prepared. He had brought along a small thermos of ginger tea, brewed just before they left home. After the meal, while others lingered over coffee, Samuel poured himself a cup from the thermos. The familiar warmth spread through him, and he knew he had sidestepped what could have been another uncomfortable evening. When they got home that night, Samuel leaned against the kitchen counter, holding the empty thermos with a satisfied smile. "I think I'm finally learning how to live with this," he said quietly. Anna reached up to squeeze his shoulder. "No," she corrected gently. "You're not just living with it. You're learning how to live well again." That was the essence of Ginger's gift to Samuel. Not just relief, but empowerment. Each cup was a reminder that he could make choices that supported his body, choices that brought comfort instead of conflict. And as the months ahead unfolded, ginger tea would remain a steady companion in his journey toward a calmer, kinder relationship with his own digestion. It was one of those crisp January mornings when the air outside feels fresh enough to sting your cheeks. Samuel was bundled in his thick winter coat, returning from his usual short walk around the neighborhood. The cold had awakened his senses, and by the time he stepped inside, the warmth of the house felt like a soft embrace. Anna was in the kitchen, humming to herself, the faint scent of something minty drifting from the stovetop. "What's that smell?" Samuel asked, shrugging off his coat. Anna smiled and lifted a steaming mug toward him. "Peppermint tea," she said. "Thought you might like to try it after your walk." He hesitated. The word peppermint brought back memories of candies and chewing gum, not something he imagined drinking for health. But the steam curling from the cup carried a clean, refreshing aroma that made him curious. He took a careful sip. The tea was cool on his tongue but warm in his throat, a strange yet pleasant combination. As he swallowed, a gentle coolness seemed to settle in his chest, like a breeze had wandered down into his stomach. At first, it felt purely soothing. The tightness in his belly relaxed, and the lingering heaviness from breakfast seemed to lift. Samuel leaned against the counter, taking another slow sip, appreciating how light the tea felt compared to the stronger, spicier kick of ginger. Peppermint had a way of clearing his head, too, almost as if it made space not just in his stomach, but in his thoughts. That afternoon, he told me about his experience. It felt fresh, light, like my stomach could breathe, he said. I nodded, but also gave him a gentle warning. Peppermint can be wonderful for digestion, I explained, especially for relaxing stomach muscles and easing gas. But for people with reflux, it can sometimes backfire. His brow furrowed. Backfire how? I told him about the lower esophageal sphincter, that tiny valve between the stomach and esophagus, and how peppermint's relaxing effect could sometimes make it easier for acid to slip upward. So it's not about avoiding it completely, I said, but about using it with awareness. See how your body responds. Samuel took my words to heart. Over the next week, he experimented carefully. He drank peppermint tea after lighter meals, avoiding it after anything rich or heavy. He noticed that on days when his stomach felt bloated or crampy, peppermint worked wonders. But on evenings after a large dinner, the cooling sensation sometimes gave way to a faint burn in his throat a couple of hours later. Anna joined in the experiment, making peppermint tea part of their late morning ritual a few times a week. They found it especially nice after walks, when their bodies felt gently tired and ready for something calming. Samuel enjoyed how the tea seemed to reset his stomach after a busy morning. It was a different kind of comfort from ginger, not the warming, fiery relief, but a clean, refreshing reprieve. One memorable afternoon, they had lunch with friends at a small cafe downtown. The food was simple, a vegetable soup with crusty bread. Afterward, Samuel ordered a peppermint tea instead of coffee. Sitting by the window, watching the winter light fade, he felt that same airy freshness bloom in his chest. It was almost like his body sighed in relief, as if saying, "Thank you for not overloading me today." He began to recognize peppermint as a gentle ally, best suited for moments when his system needed cooling and calming, not heavy lifting. And the awareness that it could be a double-edged sword made him feel more in control. This wasn't about blindly following a remedy. It was about forming a partnership with his own body, learning when to invite peppermint in and when to keep it on the shelf. One Saturday, Emily came over with her 2 young boys. The house was full of energy. Toys scattered across the living room, the smell of Anna's baking drifting from the oven. After lunch, Samuel brewed peppermint tea for himself and Anna, savoring the small moment of calm amid the chaos. Emily joined them and asked about the tea, curious why her parents seemed to enjoy it so much. Samuel explained in his patient teacher's voice how peppermint could help soothe the stomach. Emily laughed. "Leave it to you, Dad, to turn tea into a science lesson." But Samuel didn't mind. For him, every small lesson learned about his digestion felt like a step toward freedom. He no longer felt like a passive victim of reflux. Peppermint wasn't a miracle cure, but it was a tool he could use wisely. One more option in his growing collection of natural supports. By late winter, peppermint had earned a place in Samuel's kitchen right alongside ginger and chamomile. It wasn't his everyday choice, but it was the one he reached for on days when he felt tense in both body and mind, when his stomach needed a cool breeze instead of a warming fire. And in learning how to use it thoughtfully, he was also learning the larger lesson of his healing journey, that balance, not extremes, was the key. He often told me in our follow-ups, "It's funny, the more I pay attention, the more I realize my body tells me what it needs. I just never used to listen." And peppermint, with its refreshing whisper, had become one of the ways he listened better. It was a restless February evening when Samuel truly discovered chamomile's quiet magic. The day had been long, filled with errands and a few unexpected stresses, a call from the bank about some paperwork, a plumbing leak in the guest bathroom. By the time dinner was over, Samuel's shoulders were tight, his thoughts were buzzing, and he could already feel a faint burn curling in his chest. He knew from experience that this was the kind of night where reflux would follow him into bed like an unwelcome shadow. Anna, seeing the tension in his face, said softly, "Let me make you something." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with a mug of pale golden tea. "Chamomile," she announced gently, setting it in front of him. Samuel looked at the steaming cup, inhaling its delicate, almost apple-like fragrance. The scent alone seemed to lower the volume on his thoughts. He took a slow sip, letting the warm liquid settle in his mouth before swallowing. It wasn't bold like ginger, nor brisk like peppermint. It was soft, almost like a whisper. The warmth moved down his throat into his chest, carrying a subtle sweetness that seemed to melt the tension in his shoulders. Anna sat beside him, sipping her own cup, the two of them saying little, just breathing in the quiet. Within half an hour, Samuel noticed something remarkable. The tightness in his chest had eased, and the burn that had threatened to flare never truly took hold. Even his breathing felt deeper, more relaxed. He realized that his stomach wasn't the only thing that had needed calming. His mind had been stirring the pot all evening, and chamomile, in its gentle way, had soothed them both. When he told me about it later, I explained that chamomile has long been used not only as a digestive aid, but also as a natural relaxant. Stress and reflux are old companions, I told him. When one shows up, the other often isn't far behind. Calming your mind can calm your stomach too. Samuel nodded, understanding now why this tea had felt different. From that night on, chamomile became a staple in his bedtime routine. Around 9 o'clock, when the house began to quiet, Samuel would fill the kettle and pull out the small jar of dried chamomile flowers he kept on the counter. The simple act of scooping them into his favorite teapot felt grounding. He would let the tea steep while dimming the lights in the living room, setting the scene for a gentler end to the day. The first few nights he followed this ritual, Samuel noticed not just fewer reflux symptoms, but also a deeper, more restful sleep. He no longer woke at 2 a.m. with acid climbing his throat. Instead, he would sleep through until morning, waking with a clear head and a calm stomach. "It's like the tea tucks me in," he told Anna with a smile one morning. Anna, ever supportive, joined him in the ritual. Sometimes they would sit together in the living room, sipping their tea while talking softly about their day. Other nights, they would simply enjoy the quiet, the warm mugs in their hands, a shared comfort. It became more than just a health habit. It was a small, nightly ceremony that brought them closer. One particularly memorable evening, their daughter Emily called to check in. Hearing about her parents' chamomile ritual, she laughed. "You two sound like you're running a little tea spa over there," she teased, but then her voice softened. "I'm glad you found something that works, Dad." Samuel could hear the genuine relief in her tone, and it made the tea taste even sweeter that night. Of course, chamomile wasn't a magic shield. There were still occasional flare-ups, especially if Samuel pushed his luck with a late or heavy dinner. But even then, the tea provided comfort, easing the discomfort, helping him settle and preparing his body for rest. It was a reminder that healing doesn't always come in the form of dramatic change. Sometimes it's the small, consistent acts of care that make the biggest difference over time. By late winter, Samuel began to associate chamomile with more than just bedtime relief. On stressful afternoons, he would brew a cup to help himself slow down before the evening rush. On quiet Sunday mornings, he and Anna would sometimes choose chamomile instead of coffee, enjoying the gentle start it offered. It became part of the rhythm of their days, a reliable thread of calm woven through the weeks. The more Samuel leaned into these simple moments, the more he realized that managing reflux wasn't only about avoiding triggers, it was about creating an environment where his body felt safe to heal. Chamomile, with its unassuming presence, had taught him that lesson better than anything else. One night in early March, as they sat side by side on the couch, mugs in hand, Samuel turned to Anna. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "this whole journey started with pain, but somehow it's given us these quiet moments I wouldn't trade for anything." Anna smiled and squeezed his hand. "Sometimes," she said, "the best things come disguised as problems." And in that moment, Samuel knew that chamomile was more than just a tea for his stomach. It was a gift for his life. It happened on a breezy afternoon in early March. Samuel had just finished a modest lunch, a bowl of vegetable soup with a slice of bread, and was looking forward to a quiet afternoon of reading. But less than an hour later, he felt a strange heaviness in his midsection. It wasn't the fiery burn of reflux this time. It was a tight, swollen feeling that made his waistband dig into his stomach. He shifted in his chair, trying to get comfortable, but the pressure only seemed to grow. Anna noticed him fidgeting and asked, "Is it the reflux again?" Samuel shook his head. "No, not exactly. It's more like I'm carrying a balloon in my stomach." She nodded knowingly. "Bloating," she said. "You've had it before, but maybe you didn't notice because the reflux was louder." Anna rummaged in the cupboard and pulled out a small jar filled with pale green seeds. "Fennel," she explained. "My mother swore by it for gas and bloating. I'll make us some tea." Samuel raised an eyebrow. He associated fennel with the faint licorice taste he sometimes encountered in Italian sausage. Not something you'd drink from a cup, but he trusted Anna's instincts. As the seeds steeped, the kitchen filled with a sweet, herbal aroma, gentle yet distinctive. When Anna handed him the mug, Samuel took a tentative sip. The flavor was light and soothing, with that faint licorice note he recognized. It wasn't overpowering, just pleasant. And as he drank, he noticed something unexpected. The tightness in his stomach began to ease, almost like air slowly escaping from that invisible balloon. Within 30 minutes, the discomfort had faded. Samuel leaned back, surprised. "That's actually amazing," he admitted. Anna smiled. "Told you. Nature has its own answers if we know where to look." When Samuel told me about it at his next appointment, I explained that fennel has been used for centuries as a natural carminative, something that helps reduce gas and ease bloating. "It relaxes the muscles in your digestive tract," I said, "which makes it easier for trapped gas to move along. And that means less pressure pushing up against your stomach." Samuel's eyes widened a little. "So that pressure could make reflux worse?" I nodded. "Absolutely. Bloating isn't just uncomfortable, it can contribute to the very symptoms you've been trying to control." That revelation shifted something for Samuel. He began to see bloating not as a separate annoyance, but as a key player in the reflux puzzle. If he could keep the pressure down, he could keep the acid down too. And fennel, it seemed, was a simple tool to help him do just that. Over the next few weeks, he started reaching for fennel tea whenever he felt that familiar fullness. Sometimes it was after a heavier meal, other times it was after eating foods he knew could be gassy, beans, broccoli, or even a big salad. He found that drinking fennel tea before the discomfort peaked worked best, almost like heading off a problem before it could take hold. One Sunday afternoon, Samuel and Anna hosted Emily and the grandkids for lunch. The table was filled with hearty dishes, roasted vegetables, lentil stew, warm bread. Samuel enjoyed himself, eating slowly but still feeling pleasantly full by the end. As the dishes were being cleared, he quietly brewed a pot of fennel tea for himself and Anna. Emily wrinkled her nose playfully. "What's that smell?" she teased. "Fennel," Samuel replied, grinning. "My secret weapon against bloating." Later that day, as he sat in his armchair watching the grandkids play on the floor, Samuel realized something. He felt full but comfortable. No tight waistband, no pressure creeping upward, no threat of reflux. Just a gentle warmth in his stomach and a sense of ease in his whole body. It was such a small victory, but one that made him feel in control. He began to see fennel tea as more than just a remedy. It became a way of giving his digestion a little breathing room, and unlike medication, it didn't leave him feeling weighed down or sluggish. Instead, it was light, almost uplifting. He liked that he could enjoy it any time of day without worrying about side effects or interactions. One evening, after a dinner out with friends, Samuel suggested they all come back to his house for tea. While most reached for chamomile or peppermint, he brewed himself a strong cup of fennel. One friend asked about it, and Samuel found himself explaining, almost like a teacher again, how it helped with gas and bloating. They listened with interest, and one even asked for the recipe. Samuel chuckled to himself. Just a few months ago, he wouldn't have imagined being the kind of person who could talk passionately about herbal teas. But it wasn't just about tea anymore. It was about noticing what worked for his body, making small adjustments, and taking ownership of his health in a way he never had before. Fennel was one piece of that puzzle, but it was a piece he had come to value deeply. As spring edged closer, Samuel found himself looking forward to those moments when the kettle whistled and the sweet scent of fennel filled the air. It wasn't a chore or a treatment. It was a quiet act of care, a gentle reminder that he was learning to live not just without pain, but with comfort. And for a man who had once approached every meal like a cautious soldier entering battle, that was no small thing. The first time cinnamon tea truly caught Samuel's attention, it wasn't because of reflux or bloating, it was because of the cold. It was a blustery afternoon in early April, the kind where the wind rattled the windows and the air smelled faintly of rain. Samuel had been out in the garden tidying up after winter, trimming back branches, clearing leaves from the flower beds. By the time he came inside, his fingers were stiff, his cheeks red, and a chill had settled deep into his bones. Anna was in the kitchen, leaning over a saucepan on the stove. The warm, sweet, spicy aroma drifting through the air was unmistakable. "Cinnamon tea," she said before he could ask. "Thought you might like something to thaw you out." Samuel accepted the steaming mug, cupping it in his hands like a precious gift. The first sip was pure comfort, warm, smooth, and lightly sweet, with a gentle spice that seemed to bloom in his chest. It didn't just warm his body, it wrapped around him like a memory of cozy winter nights from years past. "That," he murmured, "is exactly what I needed." At first, he thought of it only as a treat, a way to chase away the cold. But as the afternoon went on, he noticed something else. The heaviness from lunch had eased, and the familiar twinge of reflux that often came after midday meals never arrived. Curious, he mentioned it to me at his next appointment. I explained that cinnamon isn't just a fragrant spice, it has natural, anti-inflammatory, and antimicrobial properties. It can help your stomach digest more efficiently, I told him. It may also reduce the kind of mild inflammation that makes reflux worse. And, I added with a smile, it just so happens to taste wonderful. Samuel chuckled. That last part might be my favorite benefit. Intrigued, Samuel began to experiment. On cooler mornings, he would brew a cup of cinnamon tea instead of coffee. On evenings after a hearty meal, he found that sipping it slowly eased the lingering fullness in his stomach. The warmth seemed to encourage his body to relax, while the gentle spice helped him feel lighter and more settled. One particularly memorable moment came after a dinner with friends. The meal had been delicious: roast chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, a rich gravy, but Samuel knew from experience that it could be a recipe for discomfort later. Instead of his usual chamomile or fennel, he decided to try cinnamon tea. He brewed a strong cup, the deep red-brown liquid swirling in his mug, and took it to the living room where Anna was reading. As they sat together, he realized the familiar post-dinner heaviness wasn't building the way it usually did. By bedtime, he felt calm, comfortable, and surprisingly light. That's when cinnamon tea moved from occasional treat to regular companion in his routine. He didn't drink it every day, but when he wanted both comfort and digestive support, it became his go-to choice. He liked how it felt indulgent yet wholesome, like giving himself dessert without the sugar. Anna noticed the change too. "You seem easier in the evenings," she observed one night. Samuel thought about it. She was right. The gentle ritual of preparing the tea, boiling the water, adding the cinnamon sticks, letting it steep, had become a way to slow down, to transition from the busyness of the day to the quiet of the night. And the way it soothed his stomach was a welcome bonus. One rainy Saturday, Emily stopped by with the grandkids. While the children played on the floor, Samuel made a pot of cinnamon tea for himself, Anna, and Emily. She took a sip and smiled. "This is lovely, Dad, and it smells like Christmas." Samuel grinned. It's more than just a nice smell. It helps me keep my stomach in line after a big meal. Emily raised her eyebrows. Really? You'll have to make me a cup after dinner sometime. Sharing the tea with his daughter felt like passing on a small piece of the wisdom he'd gathered in his journey. Just a few months ago, he wouldn't have imagined that herbal teas, something he once thought of as background drinks, could play such a central role in his health. Now they were a cornerstone of his daily comfort. Cinnamon, in particular, felt like a gift. It bridged the gap between pleasure and purpose, offering both the joy of a warm, fragrant cup and the practical relief of a calmer stomach. It reminded Samuel that taking care of himself didn't have to feel like a chore. It could be as simple and satisfying as sharing a pot of tea with someone he loved. And so, as spring slowly gave way to warmer days, cinnamon remained a quiet but steady ally in his kitchen cabinet, ready to warm, soothe, and remind him that healing could be as comforting as it was effective. By the time April turned to May, Samuel had a shelf in his kitchen devoted entirely to tea. There was the ginger he reached for when he needed warmth and digestive strength, peppermint for those light, airy afternoons, chamomile for winding down at night, fennel for bloating, and cinnamon for comfort on cooler days. Each one had its own place in his routine, and he had begun to see them not as separate remedies but as parts of a whole. One evening, as he and Anna were cleaning up after dinner, she teased him. "You've turned into a tea apothecary," she said, glancing at the neat rows of jars and packets. Samuel laughed but didn't deny it. "They've all helped me in different ways," he replied. "It's like they each speak a different language, but they're all telling my stomach the same thing. Relax." It was a good way to describe what was happening. Over the months, the teas had quietly worked their way into more than just his daily routine. They had begun to change the way his body responded to food, stress, and rest. Where once he would have felt the sharp burn of reflux after even a modest indulgence, now he found that symptoms came less often, and when they did, they were gentler, easier to manage. One afternoon, Samuel came to see me for a regular check-in. As we talked, I could tell he was beginning to connect the dots. "It's not just that the teas make me feel better in the moment," he said thoughtfully. "I think they're helping me heal in some deeper way." I nodded. "That's the beauty of natural remedies used consistently. They don't just mask symptoms, they help create an environment where your body can restore balance. The ginger helps reduce inflammation, the chamomile eases stress and tension, the fennel relieves pressure from gas, the peppermint soothes the muscles, and the cinnamon supports digestion and reduces irritation. Together, they're helping your system reset." Samuel sat back, considering this. "So it's like they're teaching my stomach to behave again?" I smiled. "Exactly. You're retraining it. And the teas are just one part of the conversation you're having with your body." That night, Samuel shared our conversation with Anna over dinner. "It's strange," he said, "but I think this is the first time in years I've really felt like my stomach and I are on the same team." Anna chuckled. "That's because you're listening to it now." She was right. Samuel had begun paying closer attention to the small signals. The subtle tension after a rushed lunch, the ease that followed a slow meal, the way his body seemed to sigh in relief after certain teas. And because he noticed these things, he could respond before discomfort turned into pain. The real proof came during a weekend trip to visit friends in the countryside. In the past, traveling would have meant losing control over his meals and routines, and usually suffering the consequences. But this time, Samuel packed a small bag of his favorite teas. On the first evening, after a rich dinner, he brewed himself a cup of ginger tea and enjoyed it on the porch as the sun set. The next morning, after a leisurely breakfast, he reached for fennel tea to head off any bloating. Each choice felt deliberate, like a small act of care. By the end of the trip, he realized he'd gone 3 full days without a single significant flare-up. That was something he couldn't have imagined just a few months earlier. On the drive home, he told Anna, "It's like my body trusts me again. And maybe I trust it too." It wasn't just about the physical changes. The teas had given Samuel a sense of control that medication alone never had. Pills had always felt like something imposed on him, something he took to shut down symptoms. But the teas were something he chose, something that worked with his body instead of against it. That shift in mindset made all the difference. One quiet evening, as he prepared chamomile before bed, Samuel thought about how far he had come. Back in autumn, meals had felt like battles. Nights had been restless, broken by the burn in his chest. and mornings had started with a kind of resignation, the feeling that this was just the way things would be now. But slowly, through small, consistent choices, he had built something different. He knew the teas weren't magic. They wouldn't erase every symptom forever. But they had given him the tools to live well, to manage his reflux in a way that felt natural and sustainable. They had healed more than just his stomach. They had healed his relationship with food, with rest, and with his own body. As he sipped the last of his chamomile that night, Samuel smiled to himself. Healing, he realized, doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes quietly in warm cups, shared moments, and the steady rhythm of taking care of yourself day after day. By early June, Samuel had settled into his tea rituals as naturally as brushing his teeth. Each one had its time and place. Ginger after hearty meals, chamomile in the quiet of the evening, fennel when bloating threatened, cinnamon for comfort, and peppermint for those light, clear moments. He no longer had to think much about which one to choose. His body seemed to guide him. But one morning, as he sat in my office, he leaned forward and asked, "Doctor, why do these teas work so well for me? I mean, they're just plants in hot water. What's really happening in there?" It was a fair question and one I loved answering. "Samuel," I began, "each of these teas contains compounds that work directly on your digestive system, not just in a vague way, but in ways we can measure. Ginger, for example, contains gingerols and shogaols. These help reduce inflammation in your digestive tract and can speed up the emptying of your stomach so food doesn't linger and cause reflux. Peppermint has menthol, which relaxes the smooth muscles in your gut and eases cramping, though we have to watch how it affects your reflux valve. Chamomile contains apigenin, which calms your nervous system and helps your digestive tract relax. Fennel has anethol, which reduces gas production and helps food move along smoothly. And cinnamon has cinnamaldehyde, which helps control inflammation and may even balance stomach acid levels." Samuel listened closely, his brows furrowing and then lifting as he connected my explanations to his own experiences. "So it's not just in my head," he said. "There's real chemistry behind it." I smiled. "Exactly. And what's more, these compounds don't just fight symptoms in the moment. Over time, they help create a healthier environment in your gut." I explained how reflux isn't only about acid, it's about the whole ecosystem of the digestive system. If the muscles are tense, if there's too much pressure from gas, if the lining is inflamed, if the valve between the stomach and esophagus isn't functioning well, all of these factors add up. The teas were helping Samuel in multiple ways at once, easing pressure, calming inflammation, improving muscle function, and reducing the triggers that sent acid upward. Later that evening, Samuel shared what I'd told him with Anna. They were sitting on the back porch, watching the sky blush pink with sunset, mugs of cinnamon tea in hand. "It's funny," he said, "but knowing why these teas help makes me want to keep doing it even more. It's not just a comfort thing, it's a science thing." Anna laughed. "Well, you've always been a teacher at heart. I'm not surprised you like having the lesson plan behind your tea." In the following days, Samuel found himself explaining the science behind the sip to friends and family who noticed his renewed energy. At a Sunday lunch, his brother-in-law asked how he'd been keeping his reflux under control. Samuel launched into a patient, teacherly explanation, describing gingerols and menthol as if he were giving a lecture to his former students. "It's all about working with your body, not against it," he concluded. "You can't just cover up the symptoms, you have to support the whole system." This deeper understanding also made him more mindful about how he brewed his teas. He realized that steeping time, water temperature, and freshness could all influence how much of those helpful compounds ended up in his cup. He began keeping a small notebook on the kitchen counter, jotting down which methods seemed to work best for each tea. Ginger was most potent when simmered a little longer. Chamomile retained its delicate flavor when steeped gently. Fennel worked best when the seeds were lightly crushed before steeping, releasing more of their oils. Cinnamon's sweetness deepened if he let the sticks simmer slowly on the stove. Anna teased him about his tea experiments, but she could see the pride he took in refining his rituals. For Samuel, this wasn't just about symptom management anymore. It was about craftsmanship, about investing in the little things that made each cup both effective and enjoyable. One particularly warm evening, they had friends over for dinner. After the meal, Samuel offered to make a tea tasting flight so everyone could sample his favorites. As he brewed each pot, he shared a little about its flavor, benefits, and the compounds that made it work. Their guests were fascinated, sipping and asking questions. One friend remarked, "It's like you're the tea doctor now." Samuel laughed, but inside he felt a quiet satisfaction. This was his journey coming full circle, from feeling helpless to becoming an informed caretaker of his own health. And perhaps most importantly, Samuel realized that understanding the science gave him patience. In the early days, he might have judged the teas harshly if they didn't provide instant, dramatic relief every time. But now he saw them as part of a bigger picture, a gradual rebalancing of his digestive health. Just as a garden needs time to grow after planting seeds, his stomach needed time to heal under this gentle, consistent care. That night, as he washed out the teapot, Samuel thought about how far he had come. Last autumn, he'd been waking in the middle of the night with burning in his throat, unsure how to reclaim his comfort. Now, not only was he sleeping peacefully most nights, but he also understood why and how the simple act of sipping tea could have such a profound impact. The teas were no longer mysterious remedies plucked from a list on the internet. They were partners in his daily life, each with its own role, its own strengths, and its own science. And Samuel, ever the thoughtful student, was committed to continuing the lesson for as long as it would serve him. It was a humid afternoon in late June, the kind of day when even sitting still seemed to make the air heavy. Samuel had just returned from running errands in town, groceries, the post office, a quick stop to visit an old friend at the hardware store. He hadn't eaten much that morning, and by the time he got home, hunger pushed him straight into the kitchen. He fixed himself a quick plate, a leftover chicken sandwich with a side of potato salad. It wasn't much, but he ate quickly, barely pausing between bites. Within 15 minutes, the familiar weight settled in his stomach. Then came the heat rising behind his breastbone, not the full burn yet, but enough to make him sit up straighter in his chair. Anna, walking past with a laundry basket, caught the shift in his expression. "It's happening again, isn't it?" she asked softly. Samuel sighed. "Looks like it." She set down the basket and disappeared into the kitchen without another word. Moments later, she returned with a mug, steam curling into the air. "Ginger tea," she said. "Drink it now. Don't wait until it gets worse." Samuel took the mug in both hands and sipped cautiously. The spicy heat bloomed instantly, cutting through the heaviness like sunlight breaking through clouds. By the third sip, he felt warmth spreading into his chest, pushing back against the creeping discomfort. 10 minutes later, the tightness had eased. By 15, he was leaning back, almost surprised at how quickly the tide had turned. "That's faster than I expected," he admitted. Anna smiled knowingly. "That's because you caught it early. You didn't wait until it became a battle." It was a small revelation. Up until then, Samuel had mostly used tea as a kind of aftercare, something to soothe him once symptoms had already flared. But this was different. This was prevention in real time, intercepting the discomfort before it could settle in. It felt empowering, like taking the wheel instead of letting the reflux steer the course of his afternoon. He tested this theory over the next few weeks. On days when he felt the first hints of trouble, a little pressure after lunch, a faint sourness in his throat, he would brew a cup right away. Sometimes it was ginger, sometimes fennel, occasionally cinnamon if he wanted something gentler. Each time, the effect was the same. The discomfort never had a chance to build into something worse. One Saturday evening, the true power of this approach showed itself. Samuel and Anna were at a neighbor's barbecue. The food was tempting. Grilled chicken, corn on the cob, pasta salad. Samuel took his time, eating slowly and chatting with friends. But midway through the meal, he felt a familiar heaviness stirring. Instead of ignoring it, he excused himself, went back home for a few minutes, and brewed a quick mug of fennel tea. He sipped it on the porch, listening to the faint hum of laughter and music drifting from next door. By the time he returned to the party, the discomfort had faded, replaced by a lightness that let him enjoy the rest of the evening. Later, as they walked home under the stars, Samuel turned to Anna. "That could have been one of those nights where I'd be miserable in bed," he said. "Instead, I barely noticed it." Anna squeezed his hand. "That's the difference between reacting and preventing. The next time Samuel saw me, he brought it up. I think the trick is catching it in those first few minutes," he said. I nodded. "Absolutely. That's when your body is giving you the earliest signals. If you respond then, you can keep the whole cascade from happening." I explained that once reflux fully sets in, inflammation and irritation make it harder to calm things down quickly. But if you intervene early with gentle, supportive remedies, you can often stop the episode before it gains momentum. That advice stuck with Samuel. He began to see tea not just as a soothing ritual, but as a first aid kit for his digestion. The moment he sensed trouble, the kettle went on. It became second nature, almost instinctive. One afternoon, Emily dropped by unexpectedly with the grandkids. They'd just come from a picnic and brought Samuel a slice of blueberry pie. He couldn't resist, and halfway through the slice, he felt that familiar shift in his chest. Without missing a beat, he got up, set the kettle on, and brewed a cup of cinnamon tea. Emily raised an eyebrow. "What's the rush?" she asked. Samuel grinned. "I've learned that if I deal with it now, I won't be sorry later." By the time the grandkids were asking for another story, the discomfort had vanished. Samuel could sit cross-legged on the living room floor, acting out the characters without the distraction of reflux gnawing at him. It wasn't just relief, it was freedom to be present in the moment. Over time, Samuel came to appreciate that the tea's real gift wasn't just their ability to soothe, but their ability to interrupt the chain reaction of discomfort before it could take over his day. That 10 or 15 minutes of brewing and sipping was a small investment for hours of comfort. And in those moments, mug in hand, symptoms retreating before they could gain ground, Samuel realized something important. Sometimes healing isn't about grand cures or dramatic changes. Sometimes it's about knowing the exact right thing to do at the exact right time, and doing it without hesitation. By mid-July, Samuel had mastered the what of his tea routine: ginger for strength, chamomile for calm, fennel for bloating, cinnamon for comfort, peppermint for freshness. But one evening, as he brewed himself a cup of chamomile before bed, he realized something. He had never really thought about the when. It was Anna who first planted the seed. "You know," she said, watching the steam curl from his mug, "sometimes I think the timing matters as much as the tea itself, like how ginger seems to work best for you if you have it right after a heavier meal." Samuel thought about it. She was right. When he had ginger within 20 minutes of a big lunch, the reflux rarely came, but if he waited until the discomfort had already taken root, it was harder to chase away. The same was true for fennel. If he drank it before the bloating set in, it worked like magic. If he waited until he felt like a balloon, it still helped, but not as dramatically. The next time he saw me, he brought it up. "Doctor, is there a best time to drink these teas?" I smiled. "Absolutely. Think of it like gardening. Watering a plant before the soil is completely dry works better than trying to revive it when it's already wilting. Herbal teas often work best as gentle support before the problem gets too big." I explained that for reflux, timing could make all the difference. Ginger or fennel within 30 minutes after a meal could help the stomach process food more smoothly, reducing the chance of acid creeping upward. Chamomile about an hour before bed could calm both the mind and the stomach, setting the stage for restful sleep. Cinnamon could be a comforting follow-up to a meal that felt heavier than planned. Peppermint, used with care, could help on lighter days, ideally between meals rather than after, to avoid relaxing that reflux valve too much when the stomach was full. Samuel went home with this advice fresh in his mind, determined to experiment. He started with fennel. After his next lunch, a hearty vegetable stew, he made a cup right away instead of waiting for the bloating to appear. Sure enough, the heaviness never showed up at all. "It's like it stopped the problem before it even started," he told Anna with a note of triumph. Chamomile proved to be another revelation. Instead of sipping it only when reflux kept him awake, Samuel began making it part of his wind-down routine. Around 9 o'clock, he would dim the lights, turn off the television, and steep the tea while listening to soft music. By the time he climbed into bed, both his stomach and his mind felt settled. He slept more deeply, woke fewer times during the night, and found himself starting the day with a calm that carried into the morning. One afternoon, after hosting friends for lunch, Samuel put his timing plan to the test. The meal had been rich: roast chicken, buttery potatoes, and Anna's famous chocolate cake. In the past, this would have been a recipe for trouble. But instead of waiting for the warning signs, he brewed a strong cup of ginger tea as soon as the dishes were cleared. He sipped it slowly while chatting with Anna at the kitchen table. The result? Not even a hint of discomfort that evening. The success encouraged him to keep refining his approach. He began to match the tea not just to the type of discomfort, but to the timing of when it might appear. If he was having a late dinner, he made sure to have chamomile ready about an hour later to help him settle before sleep. If lunch was going to be big, fennel was on standby. If he sensed a small flare mid-morning, peppermint or cinnamon would step in before it could grow. One Saturday, Emily stopped by with the grandkids. They brought pastries from the bakery, buttery croissants and jam-filled danishes. Samuel happily joined in, but halfway through his second pastry, he chuckled. "I'm going to need my cinnamon tea soon," Emily laughed. "You're like a weather forecaster for your own stomach." The more Samuel practiced, the more he realized timing was about respect, respecting how his body worked and supporting it before it reached the tipping point. It wasn't about being rigid or anxious. It was about being prepared in the same way you'd carry an umbrella if the sky looked threatening. And with this new awareness came an unexpected bonus: confidence. He no longer feared meals the way he once did. Instead of sitting down to dinner wondering if he'd pay for it later, he knew he had a plan, and that plan was as simple as putting the kettle on at just the right moment. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Samuel sat on the porch with Anna, sipping fennel tea after their supper. "It's funny," he said, "but timing these teas feels like working with my body instead of against it. Like we're finally on the same side." Anna smiled. "Maybe that's why you've been so much more at ease lately." She was right. And in that quiet moment, with the day fading and his stomach calm, Samuel felt something even deeper. The simple peace of knowing that a little forethought and a warm cup at the right time could keep his life as light and comfortable as the evening breeze. By late summer, Samuel's tea shelf in the kitchen was no longer just a collection of remedies, it was a map of his journey. Each jar, each packet, each cinnamon stick told part of the story. The nights he couldn't sleep from burning in his chest, the afternoons when bloating kept him from enjoying time with his grandkids, the dinners that used to end in regret but now ended with a warm, soothing cup. Some mornings he would stand in front of that shelf and smile, thinking about how far he had come. The teas were no longer treatments in his mind, and they were part of the fabric of his days. Like brushing his teeth or tying his shoes, they weren't something he had to remember to do. They were simply what life looked like now. It wasn't just the teas themselves that had changed him. It was the rhythm they had created. The gentle pause in the morning to choose a tea that would guide the day. The mindful brewing after a meal, letting the steam rise and curl while his body unwound from eating. The quiet evening ritual with chamomile, the soft conversation with Anna as they sipped together before bed. These moments had become anchors, small but steady reminders to slow down, breathe, and care for himself. Anna noticed the difference in ways that went beyond digestion. "You seem calmer now," she said one evening as they prepared dinner. Samuel chuckled. "That's because I'm not constantly bracing for the burn." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. These small rituals had taught him to respect his body's needs, not as an inconvenience, but as a partnership. The transformation showed itself in other areas too. Samuel had started eating more slowly without even thinking about it. He naturally stopped piling his plate too high. He made time to sit at the table for meals instead of eating on the go. And he listened, really listened, to the quiet signals his body sent him. A little pressure here, a gentle shift there, the way his breathing felt after certain foods. These cues used to go unnoticed. Now they were part of his awareness. One Sunday afternoon, Emily and the grandkids came over for lunch. After the meal, the kids ran outside to play, while Samuel brewed fennel tea for himself and Anna. Emily joined them at the table. "You know, Dad," she said, "I remember last year when you were always so uncomfortable after meals. You hardly wanted to eat with us. Now it's like, you're back." Her words landed warmly. It wasn't just about avoiding pain anymore. It was about being able to fully take part in life again, to laugh over dessert, to chase a grandchild across the lawn, to linger at the table telling stories without watching the clock for when the discomfort might hit. The teas were a part of that freedom, but the real change was in the way he lived. Samuel thought about this later that evening as he prepared his chamomile. Healing, he realized, wasn't a single event. It was a long, winding road made of small, repeated choices. Choosing tea over antacids when the first signs appeared. Choosing to slow down rather than rush. Choosing to prepare his body for comfort instead of hoping discomfort wouldn't come. Over time, those choices had stitched themselves into habits, and those habits had reshaped his days. I saw him for a checkup not long after, and he told me about these changes with quiet pride. "I don't feel like I'm managing a problem anymore," he said. I feel like I'm just living my life, and the problem's taking care of itself. I smiled. That's exactly the goal. Good health should feel like freedom, not like constant management. As August rolled into September, Samuel found himself looking forward to the cooler months ahead. He knew there would still be moments when reflux tried to sneak back in, an indulgent holiday meal, a rushed lunch on a busy day. But now he had his rituals, he had his tools, and more importantly, he had a way of living that supported his health without making it feel like a chore. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped low and the air smelled faintly of autumn leaves, Samuel sat on the porch with Anna, their mugs of cinnamon tea warming their hands. "It's funny," he said, "I started all this just trying to stop the burning in my chest, but somewhere along the way, I think I learned how to actually take care of myself." Anna smiled at him over the rim of her mug. "And that," she said, "is why these little habits last, because they make life better, not just healthier." Samuel nodded, feeling the truth in her words. These rituals weren't going anywhere, not because he had to keep them, but because he wanted to. They were his now, as much a part of his life as the stories he told his grandkids or the walks he took in the early morning light. And in that simple truth, Samuel knew he'd found something that would carry him for the rest of his days. By early autumn, Samuel's relationship with tea felt as natural as breathing. He knew which cup to reach for, when to brew it, and how each one would make him feel. But one evening in late September, he had an experience that reminded him, even the gentlest remedies have their limits, and they must be used with care. It started on a Sunday afternoon after church. Samuel and Anna had been invited to a neighbor's luncheon. The meal was rich, creamy pasta, warm bread, and an apple pie still warm from the oven. Samuel enjoyed himself thoroughly, chatting and laughing with old friends, but by the time he got home, his stomach was feeling the weight of his indulgence. Without thinking, he went straight for the peppermint tea. At first it was refreshing, that cool, clean feeling spreading through his chest and belly. But an hour later, he felt an all too familiar burn rising in his throat. He sat back, frowning, confused. This was the very tea that had eased him so many times before. Anna noticed his discomfort and asked what was wrong. "I think I may have made it worse," he admitted. The next day, he told me about it during our check-in. I nodded knowingly. "Peppermint can be wonderful," I said, "but in some people, especially when taken after a large, heavy meal, it can relax the lower esophageal sphincter too much. That's the muscle that keeps acid from moving up. If it relaxes too far, you get exactly what you felt." Samuel sat quietly for a moment, absorbing this. "So even tea can be a little risky if I'm not careful?" I smiled. "Samuel, even water can be harmful if you drink too much at once. Natural remedies are gentle, but they're not magic. They need to be used with understanding." That conversation opened a new chapter in Samuel's learning. He began to think more critically about his choices. He learned that ginger, while generally safe, could irritate the stomach lining if taken in very large amounts, especially for people with ulcers. Chamomile, though calming, could cause allergic reactions in those sensitive to plants in the daisy family. Fennel, as soothing as it was, wasn't recommended in excess for certain hormonal conditions. And cinnamon, while beneficial, could be harmful in high doses due to natural compounds that stress the liver if overconsumed. It wasn't about fear, it was about respect. Samuel didn't stop drinking his teas, but he learned to use them wisely. He limited peppermint to lighter meals or between meal times. He kept his ginger servings moderate. He treated cinnamon as an occasional comfort, not an everyday staple. And he paid attention to his body's signals, adjusting his choices if something didn't feel quite right. Anna became his partner in this mindfulness. She kept a small card on the fridge listing gentle reminders. Peppermint, between meals; ginger, avoid if stomach feels raw; cinnamon, no more than 1 strong cup per day. They treated it like a friendly guide, not a rule book. One evening, Emily came over for dinner. After the meal, she reached for the peppermint jar and began to make herself a cup. Samuel stopped her gently. "Heavy dinner tonight. Try fennel instead. Peppermint might make things worse." She looked at him, amused. "Listen to you, Dad, giving tea safety tips." Samuel chuckled. "Let's just say I've learned a few lessons the hard way." Those lessons deepened his appreciation for the teas that had become part of his daily life. He no longer saw them as harmless background habits, but as tools. powerful in their own way and deserving of the same respect he would give any other form of treatment. He understood now that even something as simple as timing, portion size, and personal sensitivity could make all the difference between healing and harm. And in that understanding came a new kind of peace. He knew he didn't have to be perfect. He didn't need to drink every tea every day or follow a rigid schedule. He simply needed to stay aware, to listen to his body, and to treat these remedies as allies, not crutches. One crisp October night, Samuel stood at the kitchen counter, spooning chamomile into the teapot. Anna came in, wrapping a cardigan around her shoulders. "Careful," she said with a smile, "don't overfill the pot." Samuel looked up at her and grinned. "You know me, all about balance now." And he meant it, because in learning the warnings he must not ignore, Samuel had discovered something even more important. Health isn't just about what you add to your life, but about knowing how to use it well. It was a quiet Sunday morning in late October when Samuel found himself sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wood in soft golden streaks. In front of him sat his favorite mug, steam rising gently from a fresh pot of chamomile tea. Outside, the air was crisp, the last few autumn leaves tumbling lazily from the trees. Anna was still upstairs, and for once, the house was perfectly still. He took a slow sip and smiled, not just at the tea's warmth, but at the realization that mornings like this had become his new normal. A year ago, he would have woken to a dull burn in his chest, the memory of another restless night still clinging to him. Back then, meals were something to navigate carefully, always shadowed by the question, "Will I regret this later?" But now, thanks to the small, consistent changes he'd made and the teas that had guided him, those fears had faded into the background. Samuel thought about how his journey had started almost by accident, with a single cup of chamomile Anna had offered on a rainy October morning. At the time, it had been just a kindness from his wife, a way to comfort him when his stomach felt unsettled. He hadn't known that cup would be the first step in a transformation, not just in his digestion, but in the way he lived his life. Over the months, each tea had taught him something different. Ginger showed him that warmth could be strength. Peppermint taught him that freshness could be relief, but only when used wisely. Chamomile reminded him that calm was as important as medicine. Fennel proved that even bloating, that quiet but constant enemy, could be tamed. And cinnamon taught him that comfort and healing could go hand in hand. But the teas had given him more than just physical relief. They had given him rituals, moments in the day where he slowed down, paid attention, and treated his body with care. Those moments had rippled outward, changing how he ate, how he rested, and even how he thought about his own well-being. Anna noticed it too. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she said, "You seem lighter these days, not just in your stomach, but in your whole self." Samuel smiled. "I think I am. I'm not fighting my body anymore. I'm working with it." And that was the truth. Somewhere along the way, his mindset had shifted from managing symptoms to living in harmony with his health. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about respect. Respect for the signals his body sent him. Respect for the rhythms of eating, resting, and caring for himself. Respect for the simple tools, like a warm cup of tea, that could help him stay balanced. One Saturday, Emily came over with the grandkids. They played in the yard while Samuel grilled a simple lunch. Afterward, he brewed a pot of fennel tea, pouring cups for himself and Anna. Emily watched, curious. "You really love your teas, don't you?" she said with a smile. Samuel nodded. "They've taken care of me, more than I expected. And not just my stomach, they've given me a way to take care of myself every day without feeling like it's work." He realized that was what he wanted for anyone listening to his story, not to feel pressured into overhauling their life overnight, but to see how small, gentle steps could lead to big changes over time. A cup of tea after a meal, a slower pace at the dinner table, a mindful moment before bed. Each choice was simple on its own, but together they formed a foundation for lasting health. That afternoon, Samuel took a walk through the neighborhood, the autumn air cool against his face. He passed the park where he used to stop and rest halfway through his walk, afraid that reflux would flare if he pushed himself too much. Now he strolled easily, enjoying the crunch of leaves underfoot. He felt stronger, freer, not because his symptoms had vanished completely, but because he had learned how to keep them from running his life. When he returned home, Anna was waiting with a fresh pot of cinnamon tea. They sat together at the table, sipping in comfortable silence. Finally, Samuel said, "You know, if someone had told me a year ago that tea would change my life, I would have laughed." Anna grinned. And yet, here we are. He thought about all the people out there who might be where he once was, dreading meals, waking in the night with discomfort, feeling like their body had turned against them. He wished he could tell them what he had learned, that healing doesn't always come in the form of pills or complicated regimens. Sometimes it begins with the smallest of things, like holding a warm cup in your hands, taking a deep breath, and giving your body the gift of gentle care. As the evening settled in, Samuel felt a deep contentment. His journey wasn't about perfection, it was about direction. And he was heading the right way. The teas were now part of who he was, woven into the story of his days. And as far as he was concerned, that story was only getting better. He raised his mug to Anna and said quietly, "Here's to good tea, good health, and better days ahead." And in that simple toast, Samuel knew he wasn't just talking about tea anymore, he was talking about a way of life. Samuel's journey began with discomfort that crept quietly into his life. The burning in his chest, the sleepless nights, the constant question of whether each meal would bring regret. At first, he felt powerless, as if his body had turned against him. But one rainy morning, a simple cup of chamomile from Anna opened the door to change. From there, each tea became both a remedy and a teacher. Ginger brought him warmth and strength after heavy meals. Peppermint refreshed him, teaching him to use remedies wisely. Chamomile gave him calm at night and deeper sleep. Fennel eased the bloating that had quietly been feeding his reflux. Cinnamon offered comfort on cold days, reminding him that healing could be a pleasure. Over time, these cups of tea became more than just solutions. They became rituals, moments of slowing down, listening to his body, and choosing care over neglect. Samuel learned the power of timing, the importance of prevention, and the wisdom of respecting even the gentlest remedies. And as the months passed, his life transformed. Fewer flare-ups, restful nights, and the freedom to enjoy meals and moments with the people he loved. Today, Samuel no longer sees himself as someone managing reflux. He sees himself as someone living well, with simple daily habits that keep him balanced. His teas are now companions on the journey, reminding him that healing isn't always about grand changes. Sometimes it's about the small, consistent choices that shape a healthier, happier life. So if you've been living with discomfort, wondering if things can get better, take that first small step. Your journey to comfort, health, and peace might just begin with a warm cup in your hands.